Welcome to the Bay Area Festival. I'm Denise Lowe. I'll be your moderator. And I was Kansas Poet Laureate. I have a memoir, Turtle's Beating Heart. That's 2 sentences. That's good. I appreciate so much the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria who are sponsoring this room and how important it is in these days to have independent thought, publications, speech, and festivals where we all come together with our intelligence and thoughts and are not censored. There are three wonderful writers here, and each has a native background. Each one of the things that I have learned from elders is that history is a spiritual entity itself. What we learn from the past and carry forward into the future is just so very important. And each of these writers has done a wonderful job with this. Jennifer Foerster is a poet, Mvskoke. She's been working on the memoir of Janice Gould, and I have her books in my library. This is just one of them, Bright Raft in the After Weather. Okay. And I recommend all of this. And is the Janice Gould memoir published yet? It's still yet to be put next year. Okay. We also have Chris LaTray. Sorry. Step 1, step 2, remember the names. Okay, I'm good. I'm just meeting Chris, but I read his book and I just immediately fell into it, and it was just like, this is a relative. Montana Poet Laureate, Métis, and then we also have Terra Trevor. This is her second memoir she's written. She writes about the native elders she's worked with, and I know you're going to like hearing from each of them. So I think I've hit all the boxes that, my handlers told me to hit. Moderating is really nerve-wracking, Kim. You made it look easy. And so I would like to hear from each of these writers first, ask them to read something from it or talk about their book for about 6 or 7 minutes, and then have time I have a few questions myself, and if you all have questions, please keep them in mind. And we'll begin with Jennifer.
How's that? Good sound? All right. Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you for this panel. Thank you, Kim, for all of this, and everyone for being here. I think I'm going to start by reading a piece from Janice, and then I'll talk a little bit about the memoir in prose, the prose poem memoir that I've really been honored to work on with a number of other poets, including Kim Shuck. So I'll give some more details about that. I'm just here representing the group of editors and co-editors that are representing Janice Gould, who was a Koyunkowi poet raised here in Berkeley, so this is very much home. She's also native Californian, and we lost her to pancreatic cancer when she was 70, so very young, a few years ago, in 2019. This is from the collection that is her forthcoming from the University of Arizona Press, and we're calling it This Music, a Poetic Prose Memoir by Janice Gould. So I'm going to read just one vignette from it, and then I'll talk a little bit about the project. This one is called Thumbing to Tacoma. The police picked us up as soon as we stepped off the I-5 bridge, having crossed the Columbia River. Both 18, we had decided to hitch a ride to her hometown. The officer ushered us into his black and white and took us to the police station, a small brick building in Vancouver. I carried my steel string Martin guitar and some clothes in a borrowed airlines bag, underwear and socks, a clean shirt, a navy blue pullover, my toothbrush. After my girlfriend called home, her dad wired money, and before long an officer was escorting us to the bus depot in a squad car. You girls know hitchhiking is dangerous, not to mention illegal in the state of Washington. Illegal? Really? We pleaded ignorance and caught the local Greyhound north to Tacoma. The bus pulled off the interstate at all the small towns, Kilo, Centralia, Lacey, and detoured into Fort Lewis, where a few soldiers boarded and stared at us with hard, hungry eyes. My sweetheart, who had surreptitiously put her arm through mine and sat close as we passed through the wintry countryside, now pulled away but kept her knee pressed against mine. The trip through the base seemed long and slow. These boys with shaved heads would ship out to Vietnam soon, but that was no concern of mine. I was against the war, sure, weren't we all? I came from Berkeley. We Berkeley people hated the war. I came of age singing songs like Buffy St. Marie's Universal Soldier. I didn't know any military guys, but I didn't think anyone should go fight wars. Her dad met us at the station, where he gave his daughter a hug and tipped his cap to me, smiling. When we got into his white Volkswagen, there were no scolds or reprimands. Father and daughter seemed comfortable together. They laughed and joked. He admired the parka she was wearing. She showed him the Velcro cuffs, the heavy zipper, and admitted she had borrowed it from me. I want one just like it, she said. They lived on a hill in a condo. Her dad was an organist at one of the universities, must have taught music. Her mom was a housewife, a slender little lady with thin, permed hair. She seemed dubious about me, dressed as I was, so boyish. Maybe she didn't like Indians. I had met people who felt that way. But my girlfriend's father took to me, asked me questions. I played guitar for them. Later, they let us sleep in the same room, in the same bed, and she, disrobed, was lithe, with long brown hair and tan skin, coloring from her dad. In the morning, while it snowed lightly, we sat with her father in the dining room and talked. I was amused by his breakfast, which was like my own father's, a soft-boiled egg, wheat toast with marmalade, and orange juice mixed with cranberry. He made coffee in an Italian pot I had brought my girlfriend as a gift when I came north, and which she had sent to her father, saying he would love such a device. He thanked me now as the little pot steamed and whistled. His eyes sparkled with appreciation when he poured espresso into our cups. I glanced at my lover, who sat across from me at the table. Did her father know what a fervent tenderness I harbored for his daughter? Like my dad, her father stirred sugar into his coffee, 1 spoonful, 2, and added half and half. He was humming a tune. Was it Bach? He stirred, sipped. Ah, he said, and smiled. Would he hate me if he knew? So this is just one of many prose poems that Janice had put together. Janice Gould, I'll say a little bit about, so she was raised in Berkeley. She's Concow native Californian. She attended UC Berkeley. She got an MA in linguistics and a master's in English, a BA in linguistics and a master's in English. She lived all over the Southwest and also Portland. She has a PhD in English and also a master's of library science. She's authored numerous books of poetry. Doubters and Dreamers was one that was finalist for the Colorado Book Award. She also co-edited a volume of essays on American Indian poetry called Speak to Me Words, co-edited with Dean Rader. It's a wonderful anthology. I met her when she was associate professor in women's and ethnic studies at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. I had known her as a poet. I was a student at the Institute of American Indian Arts, studying poetry, getting my bachelor's degree from 2001 to 2003. And the IAI library had the best collection of Native poets in the world. And I found Janice Gould's book, Earthquake Weather, on that library shelf, and I fell in love with her poetry. So many years later, when I was in Colorado Springs studying for my PhD, I found out she lived and worked in Colorado Springs. So I went to seek her out, and we became very good friends. We would almost weekly get together and take walks together. And she would talk about poetry. She was a master in Aikido, so she would also talk about her Aikido practice. She was this incredible musician as well, played the accordion and the guitar, played incredible flamenco tunes and Latin American folk tunes, amazing singer and writer. And I remember she once said, I'm really wanting to write a memoir, but I don't really know how to write about my life or how to make things end, like how to write about endings, like what makes a life complete. And she said she was working on these prose poems, some of which were in some of her books of poetry that you can find, and wanted to write about her life in prose poem vignettes. And we actually met here in Berkeley, because I live here, so I'd come back to visit, and she was coming back to visit as well. And we met at a cafe nearby here. I can't remember which one. And she showed me this manuscript in its early versions. And she was saying, it's just really hard to get a memoir published, but also one that is in prose poetry, because it's poems, but it's not prose, but it's not quite memoir. It's kind of its own thing. And I thought, well, Native writers, we've always done our own thing. Like, we've been doing hybrid works before such a word existed as hybrid works, right? So little did I know at that time that I would be asked years later to be a part of this editorial committee, to work with this very book. Janice was putting together and wasn't able to complete before the cancer took her away from us in June 2019. So in 2021, and then I'll kind of end this story and then we'll move on. Janice's partner, Mimi Wheatwind, asked me and Kim Shuck, who's here, and Deborah Miranda, and Lisa Tatonetti, would we work with her and Janice's manuscript to put together this collection. Most of it was already put together, but we really needed to arrange it and put it, decide on order. We put in photographs and just a little bit of fine tuning. So then it took us a few years, and now we finally have that collection together. It's going to be published in the coming next year by University of Arizona Press, Suntrack series. And I think I'll end there, and maybe when we have some questions, I'll say a little more about it. But I think it's such a contribution to literature in so many ways, not just because she was an amazing writer, but as a California native, she really was one of the first writers, I think, to talk about Indigenous queer feminisms as a California native. And this book is so much more of her story. So it's going to be an incredible contribution to literature.
Thank you so much, and I really look forward to this. Chris.
Bonjour, Indinwe Maganadug, Chris LaTray, Indigenous cause, Buna Pre Meiji, Chris Kasha Nikishin. What that was kind of a semi-traditional greeting in the two languages of my people, and I had to check what time it was to do that correctly. I said, hello, all of my relatives, Bonjour, Indinwe Maganadug. My name is Chris LaTray, Indigenous cause. And then I said, good afternoon. That was the check the watch part. Buna Pre Meiji, Chris Kasha Nikishin. You may call me Chris. And it is important, I feel, to use our languages whenever we can, because they are on the ragged edge of extinction, as my people were. So I'm an enrolled member of the Little Shell Chippewa. We were known as the Landless Indians for more than 150 years. We were Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe Moan is the language we speak, or Chippewa, or Ojibwe Moan, or Ojibwe, all different words for the same things, which is who we are as a people and what our language is. And then the second half of that, I spoke in Michif, which is the language of the Métis people. And who the Métis people are an indigenous cultural group recognized in Canada as one of the 3 Indigenous peoples who predate the existence of Canada. So it's the Métis, along with the First Nations people, along with the Inuit people. Yet in the United States, we are not recognized at all. So we didn't cross the border crossed us. We were the same people, whichever side of the medicine line that you happen to encounter us. My tribal ID says I'm Chippewa Cree, which I am. In all the ways that as Indigenous people, we are many things. Very few of us are just one thing. We are this mix of everything. And I identify as Anishinaabe because in Anishinaabe cultural view, we believe everybody is Anishinaabe. So I can say I am Anishinaabe, and that incorporates my mother's people as well. And she's entirely European, of Czech and Danish and English heritage. Yet she is part of who I am. I sit here, like every one of you, as a representation of all of the people who have come before me and all of the hard choices they made and all of the just unbelievably difficult compromises they had to make, as well as all of the joys and things to ensure this moment for me to be alive in company with you today. So all the way back to that very first Ojibwe woman who looked at the short, hairy, sweaty French guy who climbed up out of a canoe and she said, I'm going to get some of that. And the next generation was the first generation of what would ultimately become the Métis people. We are Indigenous people who come into existence post-contact with European people, beginning in the late 1600s in the Red River Valley, which is today Winnipeg, Manitoba. Winnipeg is the original Red River settlement. And I tell you all this because that is the story of my book, Becoming Little Shell, which I don't have a copy with me. Just if you see a book out there with a cover that the face looks kind of like mine, it's because it is. And it's the story of who the Métis people are. The Little Shell are largely comprised of Métis people, as well as Chippewa people who were originally known as the Pembina Chippewa. And we were the kind of the southwestern edge of the great Anishinaabe, Ojibwe territory around the Great Lakes. And being that we were on the very edge of the plains, we were the best buffalo hunters the world has ever seen. And take that, Blackfeet. And that's what my book is, the story of who we are and how we came to be landless. And my family connection is kind of the narrative thread that runs through that, because I grew up in a household where my father and grandfather both denied that we were Native at all. But Grandma said we were Chippewa. And when Grandma says one thing and Dad says the other, who are you going to believe? You're going to believe Grandma, right? Because Grandma's the boss. And so I grew up identifying as Chippewa with no oh, thank you very much. See? I tell people that if your publisher ever asks you if you have an idea for the cover, do not say you don't care about the cover, because you end up with your face on it. What I care about is the map that's on the inside of the book. That, I grew up reading novels, fantasy novels that always had a map in them. And I always wanted to write a book with a map, and this book has a map that shows our diaspora. It shows all the communities west of the Red River Valley, which is the border of so-called North Dakota and Minnesota today, that flows north into Manitoba. Everything west of that was our communities and towns and cities that we founded, that we were also then pushed out of. And that's the story, and what it's like growing up and why people deny their Indigenous heritage, which is ubiquitous across not just my tribe, but everybody. And all the ways that colonialism has tried to move us away from who we are. And in some ways, they have almost been successful. But the fact we have a whole day devoted to Indigenous storytellers. We're all storytellers, whether we're novelists or memoirists or poets. We are all storytellers. And I was just reflecting on that, the shoulders of the giants that all of us here are standing on, who published and wrote when it was very difficult to be published as an Indigenous person. I'm very grateful to them. My book would not have been published 10 years ago. It's because of other folks that have done the work to make room for us. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have all of you here. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And this you have the books, but Tara's book also is a wonderful read. Here is Tara.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Kim. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for giving your time to us. I'm Terra Trevor. I'm mixed blood, Cherokee Nation, Lenape, Seneca, and German. I grew up in a large mixed blood family. My grandparents were sharecroppers. Mostly they were born and raised in Oklahoma. But they also sharecropped in Kansas, bit in Nebraska. I grew up in Compton, California. But when I was 25, I moved to the Glida, Santa Barbara area, and I lived on what was originally holy Chumash land. And I grew up within 30 years with coastal Chumash and San Ynez Mission Band Chumash. And that's what my memoir, We Who Walk the Seven Ways, is about. It was published by the University of Nebraska Press, and it's my relationship with the Native elder women and how, as a young woman, I came to be close friends with them. After I experienced a great loss, they embraced me and began guiding me through the 7 cycles of life in their indigenous ways. And over 3 decades, these women lifted me from grief, instructed me in living, and showed me how to age from youth into beauty. Moving back and forth across time, I recounted the complexity of my mixed blood experiences and how they were shaped by U.S. law and policies governing Native lives and culture. With tender honesty, I discover how the end is always a beginning, with my reflections on the deep power of women's friendship, losing 2 children, reconciliating complicated roots, and finding richness in every stage of life shows me that being an American Indian with a complex lineage is not about being part something, but about being part of something. And I began writing this memoir when I was almost 70, the same age as some of these women were when they began mentoring me. And I remember thinking they were old and wise. And now I'm walking towards the older part, but I don't know about the wisdom. I'm hoping it's going to come. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And what I love about what each of you has said, there's so many ways of being Indigenous, and the stereotypes, and guys, we're getting past Hollywood stereotypes somewhat of Indians falling off horses in John Wayne movies. But we now have reservation dogs. We have a whole different range of representations. I guess one thing I would like to ask the panel is, as you've written these are now at press or published, what impact do you hope it'll have on the readers?
Well, actually, I had a few quotes from some of the other editors that I wanted to read that does answer this question. Because I think it was a beautiful selection of people that came together. Everyone had a different relationship with Janice Gould and her work. And so they offered that in the editorial process. But one thing I'm going to read from Deborah Miranda, because this really is so much about, well, actually they all have so much to say about how she will influence next generations. This is from Deborah Miranda. It is difficult to emphasize the importance of Janice's work as a California Indian poet and scholar for urban California Indians, LGBTQ California Indians, academic California Indians, landless and or languageless California Indians, and mixed blood California Indians. Perhaps the greatest gift Janice Gould gave us is this: there is no one California Indian. We are each invested with individuality, even as we form a shifting, evolving, reinvigorated community. Her work rejects the entrenched and damaging representations of California Indians in history, education, and media, while completely reimagining that identity as a complex, full of passion and wonder, and without limits. So I think that's one way in which Janice's work is going to continue to reverberate through generations, is by telling these stories that were not told, and stories of her life from, being in the Berkeley in the 60s, stories of her mother who was adopted by 3 non-Native women and was raised in Berkeley. So many stories that are very common with California natives. And also stories of a young woman growing up, trying to find her place as a lesbian woman, and a poet, and an artist, and a musician, in a world in which all of those identities are not really loving those identities, not making it very easy to make a living. And she made her way as a teacher. And I think she continues to teach and educate, so much like, the teachers that you've had. I feel like she was certainly a teacher for me, and she continues to be in her life and in the life that she's left for us to learn from. And I believe she'll do that for many generations.
Chris?
I kind of forgot what the question was, but I want to comment. We've all mentioned elders, and we talked about elders in the last 2 panels and things like that. And one of the things I write about in Becoming Little Shell is the debt that we owe culturally to the women, like you talk about, is they're the ones who maintained our kinship networks, and whatever shreds of language that we still have has been maintained by the women. They maintained our cultural practices the same way that they were the ones who taught those first European dudes how to survive in the first place. They've been the ones who have maintained the survival of who we are. And all too often, I don't feel that, at least in the past, they've gotten the credit for that, because the men don't participate at all for the most part. And then they join the military and they come back, and suddenly they're veterans carrying the flags in front of our processions for any of our ceremonies as like the most honored people. And it's my feeling is like, where, if there's a MIA flag, where's the MMIW flag, in our procession, all those things. And I feel like that is changing, because there is recognition of the contributions, the critical, cultural preservation nature of just being an auntie and a grandmother, and all of the ways that the debts that we owe to the women in our community. So I don't know if that has any relationship to the question, but I was thinking about that when you were talking about your book. And the number 7, in the 7
Right.
generations that multiple tribes have different versions of. We have the 7 grandfather teachings, which is what I have tattooed on my arm. And I just love all of the reverberations of this worldview that we share in subtle ways across this vast continent.
Okay, thank you, and certainly what impact we hope this would have. You can take it away, Terra, any way you wish.
Well, I was fumbling through my book when you were talking because I didn't know what I was going to say, and then I remembered, well, of course, it's the 7 ways that the women taught me, but then my mind blanked out, and I can't remember what they were. So I was thumbing really quick if I could find the chapter that it's we who walk the 7 ways, when my auntie elder friend Marie was sitting me down in her backyard and explaining to me what the ways were, and of course I didn't get it. So she just had to spell it all out. But anyway, that's what I was looking for. It's wisdom, living your life with wisdom, compassion, humility, thankfulness, giving back to others. And one of the most important things that they taught me is that we want to be there for younger women. We want to support their journey.
This at 11 o'clock, the first event in this room was the Great Rancheria's writing project for Sonoma County kids. And there were 30 kids, 35, and it was great. And we heard something from each single one. And Greg Sarah said, we come together to help all the kids. And these were intertribal. They were learning to listen and to pass on themselves. And this giving back, this respect, and the Great Rancheria providing the room. Greg said, this is our generosity. That's one of the aspects of Native people. And it was just really wonderful to see this in action and to see it working. So, and he said each year has been increasing. What is something else that came from this project than what you expected? Anyone else?
I want to make a different comment again. As you're talking about the kids, because Kim mentioned earlier in one of the earlier panels about our inner kid, our inner children, and how we need to awaken that person also. Because I think about that because as Poet Laureate in Montana, what I do is I go around and I talk to a lot of kids, and probably thousands of them from wealthy communities to poor communities. And I'm often, when after you leave a gymnasium full of disinterested high school kids, I think about, what am I even doing here? Is this reaching anybody? But, they're not the only ones, because the teacher who is awakened and really moved by their inner child, seeing a truth that maybe they had encountered, how many more people is she or he going to reach because of that awakening? So what we do in these circumstances, in these gatherings, and any one of you who might leave here thinking a little bit differently than you did when you walked in, and what effect is that going to have out in the world? Indigenous lifeways we don't go out and proselytize. We just go out and live, and hopefully we influence people through our actions. And just this, well, I didn't go to school, I don't know all the words, but this synchronicity of what you said versus what we talked about earlier, I think just speaks to the power of what comes out of our gathering.
Okay, and I love that we're just freestyling. And Terra, what comes up for you?
I freestyle. When I was 35 years old, I could never have imagined I'd be someday writing this memoir. So here, I'm going to read to you the first paragraph of the book. We who walk the 7 ways. The Indian in me is strongest. Auntie said there's no such thing as being part Indian. Before she even told me, I already knew, have known forever, the Indian in me is strongest. Bill said it was important for me to know who I am and not to let my skin color define me, not to let it define the way other people perceive me when they don't know my story. Although it seemed natural for Auntie to be the one guiding me to walk the sacred hoop, the female cycles of life for Native women, instead, it was my friend Bill, because he led me to the women who showed me the path and picked up where Auntie left off. When Bill died, I was in my early 30s. Now I'm 72, looking back over 3 decades at the friendships he guided me into with the elder Native women who informed, instructed, and shaped me into the woman I am today.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And this is, do you have a quick addition? You're holding your microphone ready.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was thinking what you asked about, like what surprised you during this process, and many, many things did. But perhaps and it continues to be the realization that people's love and knowledge and wisdom lives on, truly does, beyond their bodily time on earth. And I felt that, I've known that, with Janice. I still think of her here in that way, teaching. But this book, working on this book, has been just so revelatory in that I see and feel the continuation of her wisdom in those words. She was not a person who sought fame, ever. She loved what she did as an artist, and she loved people. And she loved trying to make a life of art and beauty and peacefulness. And her work is still going on. it goes on so beyond our like small lives. And I remember one time I did an interview with her for Poetry Northwest, and we were talking about, this was 2017, 2016, and we were talking about state of the world. And she was so clear about the difficult times we have come from and the very difficult times that we're going to be coming in for us, which we are in and will continue, especially with the living beings of Earth, all of us, all things living. And instead of being dark about it or feeling, she just had this, like, remember that each of us has something inside of us, a gesture of love, a gesture of hope. Whatever we do in our life, whatever you do with your life, you may not be able to lead a revolution or publish a lot of books or be, I'm not even going to use the word president, but you may not be able to be a big-time person. But even if you have a garden and you treat the things that you plant with love, you treat one another with love, that's a gesture of love. That is what will keep us going. And I find those words coming back to me all the time.
And at this time, are there any questions from the audience? Kim?
So I have a question. And it's kind of the question I partially built this panel
Or just a comment, go ahead.
All right. Why is it important for Native people to write about their own stories?
That's good.
Oh, the troublemaker.
Well, first, I think it's important that everybody write about their own story. You know, my story isn't any more important than any of yours. You know, in my case, what I found, what I thought was going to be, you know, I was originally wanting to write about my father, and it ultimately became more my story. But what I learned pretty early is that I was telling the story of people who never had the opportunity to tell their story. And that I am operating from a place of, you know, my dad denied his indigeneity because he lived in a world where in central Montana, when he was, you know, a teenager, there were still signs in stores that said no breeds allowed or no half-breeds allowed. So he lived in an environment where it was physically dangerous for him to own who he was. And it just gets worse and worse as you move back a few generations. And so I am not in that position. So I definitely felt the responsibility to tell the stories of my ancestors because they never could. And they didn't, not out of any reason other than self-preservation and preservation for the opportunity for me to exist to be able to tell that story. And I take that very seriously. People need to know what happened. And that doesn't mean I want to guilt trip anybody, but we're all part of that, and we all have to come through to the other side of that, and those stories are important for people to know.
Anyone else? Thank you.
I agree completely with you wholeheartedly. Okay, this is an author's note in the beginning of my book, and I also write because I can. I'm actually the first high school graduate in my family. I was born to teenage parents. My mom was 16, turned 16 2 weeks after she gave birth to me. My dad turned 17. They finished high school much, much later. Grandparents, great-grandparents. I think if anyone had 8th grade education, that was a very, very big accomplishment in our family. I'm sharecroppers. They were needed on the land. But I come from a family of strong storytellers on both sides of the family, my mom and my dad's side of the family. But I tell the stories because they could not, and here's why. The U.S. Congress passed the Religious Crimes Code in 1883. American Indian people were forbidden to hold religious ceremonies, conduct prayer, or teach children our cultures. Anyone who did could be put in jail. The Religious Crimes Code was in effect throughout my childhood, teens, and early adulthoods. Joy Harjo writes in American Sunrise poems, until the passage of the Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, It was illegal for Native citizens to practice our cultures. This included the making and sharing of songs and stories. Songs and stories in one culture are poetry and prose in another. They are intrinsic to cultural sovereignty. To write or create as a Native person was essentially illegal.
I would say, especially in this nation, which has so insistent on singularity of stories and very simple stories or minimal stories, whatever stories that the dominant people want to be dominant. Our stories are so beautiful and diverse, and why would we want to limit that? Why would we, as human people, want to limit the sounds of and the musics and the stories that tell of our human condition? And all people are a part of that.
Thank you so much, and we are our stories. I know Leslie Mvskoke has written about that in great detail, and that's one of the things that's inspired me all my writing life. And I so appreciate your thoughtful comments. And we have 1 minute left. Is there one more question? Lot to think about. I really appreciate the thoughts and I just really encourage all of you. Each of these books and book projects are just amazing. I have been inspired. I learned things from each of you, Chris, Terra. I've read your poetry. I look forward to the Janice Gould memoir. Tell me the name again.
This music.
This music. Books are out there if you want to come visit with us. Thank you to the Bay Area Book Festival. Thank you to each of you for attending. And I guess I hope to see you next year. Yeah.